When I was first becoming a pilot, I had no idea what the industry was going to look like a few years down the line. And honestly, it changed faster than anyone could have predicted. Today, the big question is now still the right time to jump into aviation? Airline hiring is shifting, training costs are rising, and the world, especially aviation, feels like it's in a whole new chapter. So in this episode, I'm breaking down the real numbers, the market trends, and what you seriously need to consider before jumping into aviation training in 2025. If you're on the fence about becoming a pilot, or if you're even just curious about what's happening behind the scenes, this episode is for you. Is now the best time to become an airline pilot, or has the window closed? The US aviation industry is emerging from a huge, unprecedented boom and bust cycle. Airlines went from grounding fleets in 2020 to hiring at record numbers in 2022, only to see hiring slow back down to normal in 2024. Meanwhile, thousands of veteran pilots are reaching mandatory retirement age, and a new generation of aviators are lining up at flight schools. This report dives deep into whether you should pursue a career in aviation in 2025. We will be examining hiring trends, economic factors, training costs, and the pros and the cons in the current US market. By the end, you'll have a clearer picture of the opportunities and challenges awaiting aspiring pilots in 2025 and beyond. In the wake of the pandemic, airlines embarked on a hiring spree to rebuild their pilot ranks. Major U.S. airlines hired an unprecedented 13,128 pilots in 2022. This was the busiest year on record, and this was followed by another 12,196 pilots hired in 2023. This hiring frenzy was fueled by a rapid rebound in air travel following the pandemic. A lot of pilots took early retirement or leaves during COVID-19, but by 2024, hiring had cooled significantly. Only 4,834 pilots were hired in 2024. This is a sharp drop that brought hiring down to almost pre-pandemic levels. In fact, in the first few months of 2024, saw only about 1,716 pilots being hired. This is a drastic downturn in pace from 2022 and 2023. Now, what does 2025 hold? Industry forecasts predict after the post-pandemic catch-up, pilot hiring will stabilize at a strong but much steadier pace. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics projects about 18,100 openings per year for airline and commercial pilots through the year 2032. These positions include new positions due to increased air travel, as well as replacements for retirees. While 2025 may not match the frenzy of 2022 and 2023, airlines are still expected to hire thousands of new pilots each year to backfill retirements and support moderate growth. Long-term forecasts are optimistic. Boeing's 2023 pilot outlook predicts that the world will need 649,000 new pilots over the next 20 years. Now that's worldwide, but a sizable portion of that is in North America. This reflects a strong demand for aviators well into the 2030s. To summarize recent and expected hiring trends, we're going to look at a couple figures. In 2022, 13,128 pilots were hired. This is record high hiring following the pandemic. In 2023, it was 12,196 new pilots. This is a slight dip from 2022, but still historical highs. Now, in 2024, that number dropped to only 4,834. This number is much lower than 2022 and 2023, but it's really just a return to the pre-pandemic numbers. In 2025, there's forecasted to be between 5,000 and 800 pilots hired. This is continued hiring driven by retirements. In 2030, there's projected to be a shortage of 13,000 pilots. This is the projected gap between supply and demand if training doesn't keep up. The consensus here is that pilot hiring remains robust, even if the manic pace of 2022 has tapered off. Aspiring pilots in 2025 are stepping into a market that remains strong, but a lot more balanced. In the next few sections, we'll explore the factors that are influencing this hiring climate and what it means to new people that are entering. Economic factors that are shaping the pilot job market. The aviation job market, especially in 2025, is tied closely to broader economic trends. Several key factors are going to influence if airlines are hiring and expanding or contracting. Passenger travel demand. Air travel demand has largely recovered back to its pre-pandemic levels as of 2023. U.S. airlines carried about 1.0448 billion passengers in fiscal year 2023. This is just shy of the 1.0576 billion passengers back in 2019 before the pandemic. This strong demand has translated into busy flight schedules and the need for more flight crews. If the economy stays healthy and if international travel continues to grow, 2025 should continue continue to see high passenger volumes. This is a really good mark for pilot job security. However, any economic downturn could dampen this demand. So pilots face a cyclical risk. Airlines have historically furloughed pilots during recessions or slowdowns, as seen in 2020. Though many U.S. carriers are reluctant to repeat the deep cuts of the past, given how hard it was to rehire and retrain pilots later on. Another big factor is fuel prices. Jet fuel is one of the airline's largest expenses. When fuel prices spike, as they did in 2022, airline profit margins get squeezed, and carriers might cut the less profitable routes. High fuel costs in 2022 and 2023 put pressure on airlines, even as travel demand was strong. By 2024, fuel prices had moderated somewhat, but volatility still remains. In 2025, elevated fuel costs could lead airlines to slow their pace, or they might even use smaller fleets. This indirectly reduces the number of pilot jobs. Conversely, if fuel prices remain relatively affordable, airlines can keep more planes and therefore more pilots in the air. Pilots don't control the fuel prices, but they absolutely feel the effects of it in the hiring market. Another thing that we need to talk about is interest rates and economic growth. The period of 2022 to 2024 saw rapidly rising interest rates as the Federal Reserve fought inflation. High interest rates impact the airlines in two ways. They increase borrowing costs. This is important for an industry that carries large debts, like financing aircraft purchases. And they can soften consumer demand as loans, credit, and overall spending power are reduced. If high interest rates slow the economy in 2025, airlines might respond cautiously, perhaps deferring aircraft orders or hiring fewer pilots than originally planned. Additionally, high interest rates also affect prospective pilots by making flight training loans even more expensive. Many pilots finance their $50,000 to $100,000 training loans. A jump in loan interest rates from 4% to 10% can add tens of thousands of dollars in interest over the duration of the loans. This is going to be potentially discouraging to some pilots to complete their training. Interest rates are a subtle factor, but play into both airlines' expansion plans and individuals' ability to afford pilot training. We also need to talk about airline profitability and ticket prices. Coming out of the pandemic, airlines enjoyed a period of very high fares. This was due to strong demand and limited capacity. This boosted revenues. If airlines remain profitable in 2025, they will likely continue investing in recruiting and training programs. However, if competition or economic factors force the ticket prices down, airlines might seek cost cuts. This can include hiring freezes or slower wage growth. That being said, many U.S. carriers built up cash reserves and streamlined their operations during COVID. This left them leaner and more resilient. The financial health of airlines in 2025 appears to be pretty strong. This bodes well for continued pilot hiring and sustained growth. The bottom line here is that the economic backdrop for airline hiring in 2025 is generally positive, with travel demand high and airlines cautiously optimistic, yet aspiring pilots should be mindful that this industry is on a cycle. External factors like fuel costs or recessions can lead to short-term turbulence when it comes to hiring. The good news here is that the long-term trends, like a growing population of travelers and retirements creating job vacancies, act as tailwinds for those entering the industry now. Pilot salary ranges and career progression. One of the biggest attractions into becoming a pilot today is the drastically improved pay. In the past few years, pilot salaries, especially in the US, have climbed to new heights thanks to industry competition and union negotiated contracts. Here's an overview of what pilots can expect to earn in 2025 and as well as how a career might progress. Regional airline pay. Regional airlines, which operate smaller jets, often feeding the major airline hubs, have historically paid much lower wages to pilots. This has changed virtually overnight due to the pilot shortage. According to industry analysis, regional pilot salaries are up 86% since 2022. That's just 3 years prior. It's now common to see first-year first officers at a regional making between $80,000 and $100,000. For example, Envoy, which is an American airline subsidiary, offers around $92,000 first year for a first-year first officer. After a couple of years, a regional first officer can upgrade to captain, where pay might jump up to the $120,000 to $150,000 range. Senior captains at a regional can approach or even exceed $180,000 in some cases. However, most pilots don't stay at the regionals for their entire career. The typical goal here is to gain experience and move up to the majors. The major U.S. airlines like Delta, American, United, and Southwest offer the highest paid pilot salaries. And these two have seen significant raises. Big carriers negotiated new pilot contracts in 2022 and 2023. These boosted pay almost 30% over the course of a few years. As a result, a new first officer at a major airline in 2025 can start around $100K to $150K in their first year. This is obviously depending on the airline and the aircraft type. As pilots accrue more seniority, their pay increases. By mid-career, say 5 to 10 years in, a first officer may be earning well over $200,000 annually. It's typically going to be if you're flying a larger jet. Once a pilot upgrades to a captain at a major airline, their pay jumps even further. Captains of a single-aisle jet, like a 737 or an Airbus A320, often earn in the $250,000 to $300,000 range. On the biggest jets, like the Boeing 777, 787, or Airbus A350, senior captains can earn more than $400,000 annually. In fact, the median annual wage for pilots, including both captains and first officers, was about $226,000 as of May 2024, reflecting just how high the average has become with these recent raises. Let's talk about the career progression from your first paying pilot job all the way up to a major airline's captain. First, you're probably going to start out as a flight instructor to build up your hours. Typically, you're going to make between $30,000 and $50,000 a year. It's not a lot, but this stage is temporary. Next, you're going to become a regional first officer. Once reaching the required hours, often it's 1,500, but we'll talk more about that later, pilots get hired by a regional as a first officer. Typically, pilots spend a few years at this level. Next, you're going to move up, become a regional airline captain. With experience and internal job postings, a pilot upgrades to captain at a regional jet. This not only boosts pay significantly, but also acts as PIC experience, which is extremely valuable. Next, you're going to move up to a major airline's first officer. Initially, you'll probably be a very junior first officer and you'll spend a while on reserve, which essentially means on call. You'll probably start out with a narrow body, smaller aircraft before moving up to a wide body, larger aircraft. And finally, you become a major airline's captain. With sufficient seniority and when a position opens up, a pilot will upgrade to captain at a major. You'll often start on short haul narrow body aircraft. Then if you want, you can eventually move up to the wide body, longer range aircraft. Seniority is everything. The longer you're at a company, the better your aircraft choice and schedule choice become. It's worth noting here that the timeline for this has accelerated rapidly recently. Due to demand, pilots are upgrading and moving on way faster than ever before. A decade ago, it may have taken 5 years plus to go from a regional FO to an FO at a major. Now, many are doing it in 2 to 3 years. Similarly, upgrades from FO to captain at majors is happening a lot sooner as waves of older captains are forced to retire. Improved salaries and faster promotions have made this career's return on investment significantly more attractive than it's been in a long time. Of course, pay comes with a lifestyle caveat. As a junior pilot, you'll work irregular hours. You have to commute or live where the airline needs you, and you'll probably spend some time on reserve. Quality of life definitely does improve with seniority. This means that you have more control over your schedule. The good news here is that airlines and unions have begun addressing quality of life issues as part of their new contracts. Schedules are becoming a bit more humane, and benefits like maternity or paternity leave, plus better rest rules, have improved alongside the pay. Overall, for those who stick with it, an airline pilot career in 2025 offers financial rewards that are among the best in aviation history. Let's talk about flight training, the cost, the timeline, and the barriers to entry. Before one can enjoy these six-figure airline salaries, there is a significant upfront investment on training. Becoming an airline pilot is often described as front-loaded. You pay a lot in time and money before you start earning the big bucks. Let's break down the typical training path, how much it costs, how long it takes, and what hurdles aspiring pilots may face. In the US, an airline pilot falling under Part 121 must hold an airline transport pilot certificate, or an ATP. This generally requires 1,500 hours of flight experience. Here's a simplified journey of what it looks like to go from zero experience to an airline cockpit. The first step here is to earn your private pilot's license. This typically takes 4 to 6 months and costs anywhere between $11,000 and $15,000. This license is your first license that you'll earn, and it allows you to fly small aircraft. Step number 2 is your instrument rating. This typically takes between 2 to 4 months and costs about the same amount of money as a private pilot's license. This allows you to fly in less than perfect weather, so you can fly through clouds. Next is your commercial pilot certificate. This certificate allows you to fly for hire, but not yet for the airlines. This timeline is typically 3 to 6 months and costs about $15,000 to $25,000, and this includes your single engine and your multi-engine. Next, you're going to need to build flight experience. You'll end up getting your commercial about 250 hours. You'll need to then build up hours to reach that magical 1,500 number. Common routes include becoming a CFI or certified flight instructor like myself, or there's other random jobs that you could find like being a skydive pilot, banner towing pilot, pipeline pilot. There's a bunch of other options. This phase can typically take 1 to 3 years, depending on if you're instructing full-time or if you're deciding to split time with someone else. Some university programs offer a reduction in hours to either 1,000 hours or 1,250 hours. If you end up getting a degree in aviation, this can end up saving you some time as a flight instructor. And finally, you earn that magical ATP certificate. At 1,500 hours or the reduced threshold if you went to college, you can take the ATP check ride. Many pilots actually get hired on at the regionals before you get to this point. The ATP check ride is typically built into most airlines' training program. In any case, by this point, 2 to 5 years in, you are finally airline qualified. Several barriers to entry are evident at this point. It has a huge upfront cost. Coming up with $70,000 or more for training is a major hurdle. Unlike careers that require a college degree, pilot trainees often need private loans as opposed to student loans. These can carry high interest rates. Recently, some financing sources for flight training have tightened. For instance, certain lenders paused giving out flight school loans, causing dips in enrollment at schools. This cost barrier has historically meant that the typical pilot has been limited to either people with military training, lots of cash laying around, or people that are willing to take on a lot of debt. Some airlines and academies have introduced scholarships or tuition reimbursement programs in the recent years to ease this, but funding remains one of the toughest parts about becoming a pilot. Next, let's talk about the time and commitment. The training path is intense. It requires strong dedication. Studying for multiple FAA writtens and check rides, a vast majority of people who start flight training never finish. Life events, funding issues, or simply discovering it's not the right career path for them can derail this journey. Those who persevere may spend years in low-paying instructing jobs before the airline door opens. It's a test of patience and passion. You really need to love flying to get through the slump of time building. Another hurdle is the regulatory aspect of it all. The US has strict requirements, specifically talking about the 1,500-hour rule. This was introduced after the 2009 Colgan air crash to improve safety. There has been discussions about easing up on that rule to address the pilot shortage, but pilot unions and safety advocates, including the FAA itself, have opposed rolling back training requirements. In 2023's FAA reauthorization discussion, a proposal to allow an alternative path to reduce flight hours did not make it into law. Aspiring pilots in 2025 should expect the 1,500-hour rule to remain in place. That means that there's no shortcut into the majors, aside from the exceptions that already exist, like being a military pilot or getting a 4-year degree at a school. Mandatory retirement age of 65 was also left unchanged after a debate in 2023. So that limit on career length also remains. And finally, one of the biggest hurdles is the fact that airline pilots have to retain an FAA first class medical. Conditions like certain heart issues, vision problems that can't be corrected to 2020, or even mental health conditions can be disqualifying or require special issuance waivers. While many healthy people have no issue passing the first class medical, it's an added uncertainty. If you invest all this time and money into your training and later develop a medical condition, it could end your career. Maintaining a healthy lifestyle and managing stress are important considerations in this career. Despite these challenges, there are supportive developments. Major airlines have launched pathway programs. United's Aviate, Delta Propel, American's Cadet Academy, to mentor and in some cases financially assist students through training in exchange for future employment commitments. These programs can provide conditional job offers well before a pilot reaches their airline minimums. This helps with peace of mind and often helps in securing loans since a future job is somewhat assured. Additionally, some regional airlines now offer sign-on bonuses, or they might even pay for your ATP CTP check ride. The US government also recognizes the need to grow the pilot workforce. While most support is indirect, such as proposing to study training barriers or improving diversity diversity in aviation, there are renewed conversations about how to make being a pilot more accessible to more people. In short, the path to the cockpit in 2025 still demands significant investment and perseverance. But for those who manage it, the payoff, as we saw earlier while we were talking about salaries, has become more lucrative than ever. The key is to go in with open eyes, budget realistically, possibly take an incremental approach, like train for one license at a time, and use any available assistance that you can get in the forms of scholarships and loans. Once you're past the initial gauntlet of training, the pathway becomes significantly easier. Let's talk about supply versus demand. You've likely heard the term pilot shortage thrown around in the media and industry discussions. But is there really a shortage, and will it persist? The answer in 2025 is nuanced. Let's examine the supply of new pilots versus demand, using data from the FAA, airline forecasts, and independent analysis. On the supply side, the FAA reports a significant uptick in people entering the pilot pipeline. In 2023, the total number of active pilot certificates rose to 806,939. This is a 6.6% increase from 2022. This was largely driven by a boom in student pilots. Over 316,000 student pilot certificates were on record in 2023. This is up from 280,000 from the year before. Flight schools are busy, and more pilots are earning licenses than ever before. This is a direct response to the attractive career prospects. People see airlines hiring and raising pay and are flocking to learn how to fly. The increase in new commercial and ATP certificates issued in the last year indicates the training pipeline is ramping up to meet industry demand. Despite the influx of trainees, most analyses still predict a gap between pilot supply and pilot demand throughout the coming decade. Boeing's long-term outlook, which we briefly mentioned earlier, equates to needing roughly 32,000 new pilots per year worldwide. North America's share of that is substantial, likely on the order of about 100,000 pilots needed over the next 20 years. Consulting firm Oliver Wyman, which initially predicted a severe shortfall, has updated its estimates showing the gap might be slightly less dire thanks to industry actions. They project a North American pilot shortage of about 13,000 by 2032. This is about 23% smaller than they originally predicted. The original estimate was about 17,000 pilot shorts. In other words, higher pay, recruitment effort, and even airlines reducing schedules have helped curb the shortage a little bit, but they didn't eliminate it. The Regional Airline Association highlighted that around 500 regional aircraft are parked due to lack of pilots. That's effectively 5,000 pilot jobs unfilled in the regional sector alone. The Allied Pilots Association and Airline Pilots Association, or ALPA, these are both pilot unions, have somewhat contested the word shortage, arguing that it was largely self-inflicted by the airlines due to early retirement and training slowdowns during COVID. They argue that plenty of licensed pilots exists if airlines would make the investment in training them. There is some truth to both perspectives. There are thousands of licensed commercial pilots not yet in airline jobs, but many may not have the experience or the desire to go to the airlines under previous conditions. But with better pay and quality of life on offer, more of these pilots are expected to join or return to the airline career track, helping ease the crunch. A major driver of demand is the retirement wave. U.S. airline pilots must retire by age 65. The industry is in the midst of seeing the large generation of baby boomers hitting that requirement. For instance, in 2022, a U.S. senator noted that 5,000 pilots would reach age 65 in just the next 2 years. Indeed, roughly between 2022 and 2024, about 5,000 pilots hit that age and retired. Similar or even larger numbers will continue through each year through the later 2020s. Airlines are basically in a race to hire and train replacements at the same pace of retirements. During 2022 and 2023, they were largely successful in staving off cancellations by aggressively hiring. By 2025, however, with hiring slowing, one might ask, are we heading back to a pilot surplus? Unlikely in the near term. The retirements aren't slowing yet, and air travel demand remains high. Even with 4,000 to 5,000 new pilots hired every year, that covers retirement and just a bit of growth, but not much slack. Airlines cannot suddenly overhire pilots because training capacities like simulators and budget restrictions prevent that. So they hire roughly just enough. This means from a new pilot's perspective, your skills will probably be in demand for years to come. Although the red-hot bargaining power that pilots enjoyed in 2022 might cool as the supply pipeline catches up. One area where supply supply-demand mismatch has had a visible effect is in the regional airline sector. Several regional carriers have had to cut routes or even shut down because they couldn't staff enough pilots at a viable cost. Over 30 small community airports in the US have lost more than half of their air service since 2019. This was largely due to a pilot shortage at regionals and changing economics. This has forced legacy airlines to consolidate their regional operations. For example, focusing on larger regional jets, which require higher paid, more experienced crews, and cutting small plane flights. For an aspiring pilot, this consolidation has two implications. One, there's fewer regional airlines to work for. A lot of them have merged or just ceased operations entirely. But two, those that remain are offering better pay and paths. Often, they have flow-through agreements with the majors. The shrinking of the regional footprint might mean there will be a reduction in total entry-level seats in the short term, but it's also pushing the majors to hire more directly and invest in their training pipelines. In sum, the demand for pilots is shifting upwards. Rather than needing 5 pilots at a tiny regional airline making minimal pay, the system might need 4 pilots at a larger regional or major making much higher pay. A net reduction in bodies is needed for the same service, but at an increase in qualifications and cost. This is actually a deliberate strategy to cope with a shortage. Airlines can't conjure pilots out of thin air, but they can choose to deploy the ones they have on routes that carry the most passengers. This would mean cutting the lesser routes. For new pilots, it means the job market might favor those who reach airline minimums quickly and can step into larger operations, whereas those who linger with lower experience may find fewer small gig operations. So, to directly address the question, is there a pilot shortage in 2025? The answer is yes in some sectors, especially the regionals and smaller communities, and at the experience level required by the majors. But the wave of new trainees suggests that the gap will gradually shrink. By the late 2020s, we may reach a new equilibrium where supply meets demand. Some forecasts think that the shortage will peak mid-decade and then recede. However, this assumes that the training rate remains high and no major economic shock intervenes. It's a safe bet that pilots entering training now will have plenty of job opportunities when they finish. The real debate here is not whether pilot jobs will exist, because they will, but whether the terms of employment will remain as attractive once the shortage eases. Pilot unions are aware of this and they're pushing to lock in long-term contracts while the leverage is still strong. Let's talk about the retirement wave and industry changes. We're going to focus on two critical factors that we've already touched on: the retirement wave of older pilots and the changes happening in the industry structure, notably at regional airlines. Both factors heavily influence the question of becoming a pilot now. The mandatory retirement for a pilot in the US is 65. That means that each year, a chunk of pilots are forced to retire. Most of these are senior captains at major airlines. They often started in the 1980s or earlier. As of mid-2020s, the tail end of the baby boomer generation, born 1946 to 1964, is reaching their mid-60s. This translates to a sustained high level of retirements through about 2030. For example, in the 2-year span between 2022 and 2024, about 5,000 pilots hit age 65. Looking ahead, estimates from various airlines indicate that roughly half of their current pilots will retire over the next decade. United's CEO has mentioned needing to hire at least 10,000 pilots this decade, largely due to retirements. Delta and American also face similar situations. In 2023, some in Congress proposed raising the mandatory retirement age to 67 to alleviate this wave, but this measure did not pass. International rules also complicate U.S. age increase, so as it stands, those retirements are inevitable. From a new pilot's perspective, retirements are actually good news. They create upward mobility. Each retiree opens up a captain's slot, who is then filled by an FO, and that leaves an FO open seat. That's filled from a new hire from the regionals, whose seat is then open for a brand new pilot. It's a cascade that pulls pilots up the ranks. This big wave of retirements is one big reason why, even with a lot of pilots in training, the career prospects remain strong. The industry is essentially replacing itself over the next 10 to 15 years. The caveat here is that if technology or other efficiencies reduce crew needs per flight, for instance, the talk of single pilot operations in the far future, that could eventually offset retirements. But nothing like that is expected to have any impact between 2025 and 2035. Airlines are also trying to increase training. They're adding new simulators and new instructors. This ensures that retirees batteries can be replaced on schedule. In practical terms, someone who starts as an airline pilot in their mid-20s could now realistically move from a regional to a major and upgrade to captain far quicker than someone who started 20 years ago, thanks to the vacuum left by departing boomers. As mentioned, regional airlines have been hit hardest by the pilot shortage and are undergoing consolidation. There's a few points to note here. Some smaller regional airlines have closed in recent years. Others have been acquired or merged into larger regional operators. The remaining regionals have shrunk their fleet. There's 500 fewer regional planes since 2019. That's a 25% reduction, focusing only on the most important routes. The traditional model is evolving. Today, many pilots view the regionals as a brief stop. Regional airlines, to attract talent, now commonly offer flow agreements. Those are a defined path to their major partner after X amount of years or X amount of hours in service. Hefty hiring bonuses, and even tuition reimbursement for pilot training. For example, airlines like Envoy, Piedmont, and PSA, all of these feed American Airlines, all have flows to American. They've also offered tens of thousands of dollars in bonuses to new pilots signing on. This is a huge pro for new pilots, but also a sign that regionals expect to be perpetually short-staffed as pilots quickly leave for better jobs. The consolidation also means fewer pilot jobs needed overall to cover regional flying. But those jobs have essentially shifted upwards. Mainline airlines have added more small mainline jets to pick up the routes that the regionals have dropped. Mainline pilots who typically come from the regionals are therefore more in demand. In essence, the nature of flying opportunities for early career pilots is changing, but it's not necessarily shrinking opportunities. They're just being reallocated. One risk to be aware of is seat volatility at the regionals. If you join a regional airline, there is a chance that that airline could lose its contract or downsize. In 2020, many regional pilots were furloughed, though by 2022 they were all recalled. Plus, airlines were essentially hiring any available pilot. In 2023 and 2024, a few regionals parked planes due to a lack of crew, and some new pilots found themselves having slower upgrade times because suddenly their airline wasn't growing. Well, it's true now that most pilots at 1,500 hours can find a job. It may not always be their first choice. Being flexible, like willingness to change airlines or move, is helpful. Now here's the good news. The major airlines have had very little to no furloughs since the pandemic. In fact, a lot of them can't get enough pilots. So once you reach a major, the job security is actually quite solid. The turbulence is mostly in that initial regional phase, which the industry is actively trying to stabilize via flow programs and higher pay. In conclusion, pilot retirements and regional upheaval are two sides of the same coin. They are the reasons that pilot hiring was so intense in the early 2020s and why it remains a promising field today. The retirements ensure that the positions at the top, like major airline captains, will keep opening up. For someone considering entering now, these factors imply a career that, while it may take a few twists, has a clear runway for advancement. It's a bit like a generational changing of the guard, and you could be a part of that new guard. Every career has its upsides and its downsides. Before deciding to chase the sky, it's crucial to weigh the pros and the cons. Here's a candid look at what makes an airline pilot career attractive in 2025, and what challenges or drawbacks come with it. Pros: pilots are in demand, which means many job opportunities and a lower likelihood of being unemployed if you keep your qualifications up. Major airlines are hiring in large numbers and are expected to continue to do so for the years to come. Unlike many fields, a newly minted pilot with the required qualifications is almost guaranteed to find a job. This is a comforting thought when considering to invest in a career. Furloughs, temporary layoffs, can happen in downturns, but with the current shortage dynamic, airlines are trying hard to retain pilots, even during hiccups. As detailed earlier, pilot pay has reached record highs. You can earn a six-figure salary relatively early in your career. Even now, some first-year regional FOs are making almost $100,000. At a major airline, the compensation is top tier among professions, especially for those without a typical graduate education. For example, by your 30s, you could be making $200,000 a year as a first officer officer for a major. And by your 40s, you could be making 300,000 plus as a captain. There are also excellent benefits, health insurance, retirement plans with strong company contributions. There's also perks like discounted or even free flights for you and your family. Financially, the return on investment is high once you get through training. The lifestyle of a pilot can also be incredibly rewarding for those who love to travel. You will literally get paid to fly to different cities or different countries, often staying overnight in places you might never have visited otherwise. Within the span of 1 month, you might have breakfast in New York, lunch in London, dinner in LA on different trips. The experiences and stories that you gather are a big part of why people are passionate about this career. Even on a domestic route, waking up to a sunrise at 35,000 feet or seeing the lights from a city up above it can be thrilling. For many, just the view from the cockpit is worth the price of admission. Flying attracts people who are passionate about aviation. If you're someone who loves airplanes, enjoys the technical aspects of flight, and relishes complex skills, this career can be deeply fulfilling. There's a strong sense of camaraderie between pilots, a shared sense of responsibility and understanding that comes with safely operating an aircraft. The pride in safely landing in bad weather, or mentoring a new first officer as a captain, or simply reflecting on the thousands of passengers that you've transported safely. Those intangible rewards bring a lot of job satisfaction that goes well beyond the paycheck. As noted, this is an era where you can move up the ranks faster than before. Ambitious individuals entering now could feasibly make captain at a major airline in their early to mid 30s if timing lines up. In decades past, upgrades were slow and based on waiting for someone above you to retire. Now, with retirements happening at a mass, younger pilots are taking on captain roles much sooner, and this overall means less stagnation. Every few years, you might hit a new milestone, aircraft type, seat upgrade, etc. This keeps the career feeling fresh. Now let's talk about the cons. The biggest con is the significant upfront training cost. Unless you have savings or military training, you'll likely incur a lot of debt to pay for your flight school. Starting your career with, let's say, $80,000 in debt is a little daunting. Even if your future salary is high, those first few years at a regional, when you might only be making 60 to 90K, can be financially tight after loan payments. Not everyone is comfortable with the financial risk. There's also absolutely no guarantee you'll make it to that major airline salary. Some people might struggle in training or find out the lifestyle isn't for them. And then if you switch careers, that debt is going to be a huge burden. So how do we mitigate this? One should have a solid plan for financing, training, and have a backup plan if possible. Maybe get an aviation degree that can also land other jobs. Earning all the ratings and surviving airline training is a rigorous process. It's not uncommon for trainees to wash out if they can't meet the standards. The instrument rating and initial airline training are known to be pressure points. If you handle stress well and study hard, this can be overcome. But the reality is, not everyone who starts this career will succeed. There's also continuous training throughout your entire career. You need regular simulator checks every 6 to 12 months. The need to consistently perform and stay proficient is a con if you dislike high-stake testing environments. Being a pilot means lifelong learning and evaluation, which can be stressful. Pilots also don't work a typical 9 to 5. Your schedule will involve early mornings, late nights, weekends, and holidays, often spent away from home. Especially as a junior pilot, you'll miss a lot of family events. Pilots often work trips that can last up to 3 or 4 days, staying in hotels each night. Jet lag is a common struggle for pilots. The disrupted sleep cycle and time zone changes can take a toll on your health and personal life. While you might get stretches of days off, you will also work days when your friends and family are off. Maintaining relationships and managing responsibilities at home can be challenging. Some pilots even commute, where you live in one city and fly to another to start your trip. This adds layers of complexity and time away. This lifestyle is part of the bargain. Some love the variety, but others find it hard on mental and physical well-being. The airline industry runs on seniority. As a new hire, you have almost no say in your schedule, aircraft, or domicile. You go where the company needs you, when the company needs you. This could mean being on reserve with maybe 10 days off a month, and you could be short called to fly on a couple hours notice. You might be assigned to a base across the country, forcing you to either move or commute. It often takes a few years to be able to hold a line that's more predictable. Patience is required to pay your dues in those initial years. This rigid hierarchy can be frustrating for those used to merit-based programs. In aviation, time served, and seniority is king. And while the current outlook is good, aviation is historically volatile. Every 8 to 10 years, something, recessions, oil price spikes, terrorism, pandemic, seem to hit airlines hard. When airlines lose money, hiring stops, and furloughs can happen. For example, after 9/11, and again during the 2008 financial crisis, and of course 2020 with COVID, many saw their careers either paused or end preemptively. The joke here is last hired is first fired. Junior pilots are the first ones to be furloughed. Now, one can hope that lessons learned in the past will prevent the worst outcomes, but one must be mentally and financially prepared for ups and downs. Having an emergency plan as a backup is wise. The good news is pilots usually are recalled to work in time as the cycle improves, but the instability can be a source for anxiety. For many, the pros absolutely outweigh the cons. The allure of flying and the benefits of this career make the challenges worth it. High school students or college grads drawn to aviation should consider taking a discovery flight or a couple flight lessons early to gauge their passion before committing fully. Career changers should also do a cost-benefit analysis. Leaving an established job for flying probably means a pay cut in the short term, but a big leap in long-term potential. Personal circumstances matter a lot in whether the lifestyle change is feasible. The good news is that 2025 offers more support and information for aspiring pilots than ever before. There are mentorship programs, abundant online communities, and resources that can help newcomers navigate this journey, like this podcast you're watching right now. Airlines are also actively trying to diversify and welcome more minorities and women into the pilot ranks. So there's a huge push to broaden access to this career. If you've ever dreamed of flying, there's arguably never been a more opportune time in terms of job market conditions, but it requires careful consideration of the personal sacrifices involved. So, should you become a pilot in 2025? For many, the answer will be yes. If you have a passion for flying and can handle the upfront costs, this career offers excitement, prestige, and financial rewards that are hard to match. The industry is in a hiring mood, and the cockpit door is wide open. However, it's not a decision to take lightly. It's akin to embarking on a long-haul flight. You need to prepare thoroughly, anticipate some turbulence, and stay the course. The data and trends we've explored show a field in transition, one that desperately needs new pilots, yet is grappling with how to train them efficiently and retain them. Opportunity abounds, but success will depend on your perseverance through training and your early career. For young, aspiring pilots, this could be the journey of a lifetime, literally and figuratively. For those switching careers midstream, know that you're not alone. A significant portion of new pilots now are making career changes in their 30s or 40s, lured by the aviation bug and promising job market. Airlines value the diverse life experience that these people bring. So finally, is 2025 a good time to become a pilot? Really? That's up to you. Thank you all for watching. If you're on YouTube or listening, if you're on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, if you enjoyed this podcast, please give me a subscribe or a follow and like, and I'll see you guys next week.